All right, hi everyone. Hope you're having a good day. Cool. I'll just get into the session really. I have made a version of Wordle. If you haven't played it, it's like a word-based game. There is some limits on the functionality. One of them is that you can still fill in letters that you have tried that didn't work before. The solution that Wordle, I think, have made is that you actually tap the letters, and so you can actually choose, you can block certain letters out from being used, but I didn't end up doing that way. What I've done is I've allowed the user to be able to type their letters in rather than selecting D, R, E, A, so the other option there would have been to create these as buttons, but I didn't do that. It then runs a check. If the letter is in the word of the day, it goes yellow. But if the letter is in the correct place, so there A is in the correct place now, it shows as green. And then if you get it correct, it says you got it, and all 5 display as green. All right. If there's any questions as we're going along, please drop them in the chat. And I'm happy to, I'll keep an eye out for the chat. Right, let's get going with it, and we can see how we get on as we go along. I've created the HTML already, and I've created the CSS. There's nothing special too much about either. There's just a div with a class of games, so I could place it in the middle of the page. There's a row for each of these rows, and there's inputs inside of them. So these are each a text input, and you can see they've got a max length of 1. So that means you can't keep adding items to it. It'll only allow you to put in 1 item for each, 1 character for each input. Okay. Let's get started. The first thing I want to do is I'm just going to add the alphabet, to the page. So here's my list of letters, my letters div. So I'm just going to select that const. Let's say this container that button query selector dot letters. So that's just selecting that, and then I've got an array of the letters of the alphabet. And I'm just going to go and add those to the page. So I'll say alphabet for each, and run the foreign function. I'll say letter. I'll go here and say letters container dot inner HTML plus equals class of item. And this is letter. Sorry, it's not item, it's letter. It's got a class of letter. And there it now displays the letters on my page. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to have something. So what I'd like is that once the user has filled in that input, I want it to automatically move to the next input. And so the way we can do that, what I want to do is I'm going to select all the inputs. So I'll go here, I'll say inputs equals document dot query selector all. Select all the inputs. And then we'll run a loop on all of those. So if you're unsure what query selector all is going to return for me, let's just take a look in the console quick. So console logged inputs. Oh, and it's input, not inputs. So it's gone and selected all of the inputs on the page, and I get back a list of all of the items. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is, because it's created a node list, I can use a for each on a node list. So I'm going to say for me inputs for each. It runs a function. And I'm going to say that inputs.on key up. Run the following function. Now I'm just going to say ConsoleLog event. Actually, I'm going to say event.target. Okay, so if we look in the console, when something happens in this, and when my key goes up on my keyboard, this event gets fired. And you can see it has a whole bunch of properties. One of them, usefully, is next element sibling. So what's nice about Firefox DevTools, and I don't know if it's in Chrome, I don't use it as often, but you can hover on this to be able to see which item is being logged. And then if I go here and I look at next element sibling, if I hover over that kind of target icon, it tells me which one is the next element sibling. And the next element sibling is this one here, that one there. And that's what I wanted to move the focus to. So at the moment, I'm focused on this one. And once the key has gone up, I then want to move the focus to this item here. And so we can say event.target.next element sibling. So now we're just going to log into the console still. But when I press a button and my key goes up, it then logs to the console. Sorry, I didn't actually need to drop that down. It logs to the console the next item. So I know that I can select that next item along. And what I want to do is I'll say that I want event.target.next sibling .focus. And this then forces that next element sibling to be the one that's in focus. All right, so we can see if this works. And it moves me along to the next item. It just keeps going to the next sibling. There is a problem though, because what if I go and I actually change the letter that I want to write and I go backspace, it still moves me forward. So what I need to do is I need to check to see that's not the expected behavior. I would think that backspace still moves you forward. So what you can do is you can check, you can run a check, you can see if event.code. So let me just quickly log the event to the console again. ConsoleLog event. We look in the console, run the event. So it tells me that the event was a key up. It tells me where it happened. It tells me what the key was. And then there's a code. And I can use this code to know what event has happened. So I'm going to hit backspace here. And you can see here it tells me that the event key was a backspace, and there's a code backspace there. All right. So what I can say in my code is I can say if event.code does not equal backspace, then event.target why is it formatted weirdly? Anyway, don't actually need to see the HTML for now. So now if that's backspace, I'm going to write A. If I hit backspace, it doesn't move me along. So I can go back here and type backspace, and it doesn't move me, doesn't go one back. I also don't want it, so if I also want to make sure, so if I do this, right, if I just keep going, eventually it's going to actually run out of items next, right? So it's going to, so if I go here, right, and go B, eventually I actually run out of there being next siblings. So I want to just make a check as well that the next sibling isn't null. So eventually there's going to be a point where next event sibling would be null. And so I don't want that code to run then. Now, the way I made it, which could be right or wrong, I guess, depends on how you want the UX to work. But if the event code happens to be backspace, and there is actually a previous, see, instead of, sorry, I don't want next sibling, I want next element sibling specifically, and then I want previous element sibling. So previous element sibling just is the opposite of next element sibling, so it's just the one before, not the one after. So if the key is actually a backspace and there is a previous element sibling, I want it to go one back. So instead of event.target.next element sibling, rather just make this previous. So now if I went here and I went back, I can actually go, I can backspace my way back through the word. That made sense to me about how to handle that. All right, so now let's say that we have written a word and we want to hit this check button here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the check buttons. So buttons variable document dot selector all, and we'll select all of the, I think they're just button, or they're a dot check, I think dot check. Look in the HTML, and there they have a class of check. So I'm going to select all of those elements and I'm just going to loop through them. So I'll say, just call it check buttons. Check buttons dot for each that function and button, and then button dot on click runs the following function. And now what I want to do, so I'm not creating a button for each row. So I'm not going to link the button to the row in any way. So I'm not going to have class row 1 because I don't want to have to write the same function for each one of these. I want it to work for all of them. So what I can do is I can try and select all of the inputs inside of the row that the event happened in. Hopefully you're following here. So let me show event.target. So let's look in the console. Click that, runs this event. And so I can see that it's that element there. If there were child nodes, I'd be able to see those. But just like that, there's also a parent. So I can look here for the parent element, and you can see that that parent element is that row. If this event happened for this button here, you can see that the scroll down, parent element is that row. Okay, so we're able to know what the parent element for that item is. And what that allows us to do is we can select all of those. So we can say, the bug out when I change. So what I can do is I can create a const of the inputs check, say event.target.parent element. So normally we write documents.querySelector, right? Because we want to look in the whole document for some items. But what if we don't want to look in the document? What if we only want to look in one element? So we can say event.target.parent element, which is this whole row. Then I want you to use a query selector all, and I want you to find all the inputs there. We can console log that out. Don't use that console, I'll use my browser console. So if I click there, you can see it gives me a node list of all of those inputs in that row. If I click this one, it gives me all of those inputs in that row. All right, so that's just a way of being able to get around the fact that I don't want to create a button for each round. Okay. What I would also like is that, let's say, okay, if I click this check, what I want is I want all of those to become frozen. So what I can do there is I'll write that inputs with check. We run another for each. I would say that the inputs disabled equals true. Sorry. So now if we write and check that, now you can see it actually gets frozen. And so the user now can't go back and edit those. Can write this a little bit shorter, especially because it's such a simple function, and we can use an arrow function. So instead we can write it like this. So now if we go, that still works. That's just a simplified way of being able to write that function. I don't want to keep console logging that. Now what I want to do is I want to create a word of the day. So word of the day. And we could use, it needs to be 5 letters. There we are. So that's going to be our word of the day. Now what I need to do is I need to run a check to see if the letter, let's do first if the letter exists inside of this word of the day. So I'm going to create a for loop. I'm going to say for 0 I is less than word of the day dot length. Actually, what I want to do is I want to create an array. And I'll quickly show you what, let me just comment that line out. So I want to be able to, as you can see, the alphabet is broken down into an array like this. And when we go and fetch all the user's inputs, it's not going to give us one string. What we actually want is we want to individually deal with one input and deal with them individually. So what I can do is I can turn word of the day into an array. And the way that I do that is using the split method. So I'm going to say const word of the day array equals word of day dot split, and split it. You can see I've just got an empty string there. And so that's going to split every single item in that string up. And so if we console log this now, console log word of the day array, you can see now we have an array, MOWER. Okay. Let me remove that console log, and now we can use this word of the day array dot length. So let me comment that back in. It's word of the day array dot length I plus plus. Okay. And what we want now is the first thing we can do is make sure that the letter that we're working with is lowercase. So I'm just going to say input letter is this inputs to check I dot value. Well, let me just quickly console log that first. Just so we on board with what's happening. So that's and as you can see now, when it logs these inputs to check, they're just individual strings of letters. Okay. What I would like is just to make sure that if the user somehow does that, I actually only want my things to be lowercase. So I'm just going to turn that capital into a lowercase. So then I'll just say dot to lowercase. So now, check that, look in the console, and you can see now it's converted that to a lowercase f, even though in the original it was actually a capital F. Okay, if the user has done, okay, well, let's just first, we'll deal with the includes. So I'm going to say if word of the day includes input letter, then I want whatever this item is, this inputs to check I, so that's hopefully that makes sense, that each time the for loop runs, right, it's going and checking the first or the item at position 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So on this iteration of the for loop, I wanted to then go and say that inputs to check I dot style dot background should equal, and let me just grab the color here quick. So that's if it includes, sorry, no, that's actually the green. I wanted the yellow. Okay, so if it simply includes that, so we can try, let's say, there's an error somewhere. Where's my error? Oh, whoops, I'm missing a bracket there. Nice of them to tell me quite clearly what the problem was. Is there still another problem? That. There we are. Okay, we got there. So now if I had to write FRONT, check that. It now is correct that R, word of the day, includes the letter R and the letter O, but it doesn't include N, T, and F. If this word was actually front, and I had to write FRONT, it would then all be yellow. Okay, but I don't want that to be the case. What I actually want is I want it to be green if it's in the correct position. Okay, so I'm going to create another if statement here. I'll say if input letter equals word of day array I, then set to check I dot style dot background, and we grab the color. What I want to do is I'll turn this into an else if, right? So first check if it's in the right position. If it isn't in the right position, at least check if it's actually in the word somewhere. So let me run that. So now our word is front. So if I write FRAME, then those two get green. If I now say FROWN, yeah, so that's now correct in the right space, and then this N is in the word but not in the correct space. So I could say FROND, for example, and then eventually I will know that it's, and they'll all get marked correctly. The last thing I want to do is that if it's not in the correct place and it's not in the word, I want to run a final else statement, and I'm going to set, what I want to do is I actually want to go into the alphabet, and I want to make the background of the letter that the user has input gray, so they can know which letters aren't in the word. So I'm going to create a letter index variable, and I'll set it to alphabet. So what I'm going to do is I want it to find where in the alphabet the letter that the user has put in is. And so I'll set alphabet dot find index. to run the following function. It runs this function that I'm writing for each item that's inside of the alphabet array. And I wanted to return it if the item equals input. And then for now, we'll just console.log letter index. Okay, so let's see how we go with this. Clear all those errors. So now if I write, let's write A, B, C, D, E, and I check that. That's not correct. Why is that happening? Anyone can spot the logic of why it's not working? That'd be great. Oh, it's because of a single equals, guys. So simple mistake. So a single equals is an assignment operator. So when you create a variable, like I'm creating that variable there, you use a single equals, but I want to use a comparison operator, which means I need to use 3 equals. So I want to check if item, and in this case, item is, I can have me console log item, you can see quick, console log item. Remove that console log for now. Clear the console, hit check. Okay, no. Let me A, B, C, D, E. And what it actually does is it goes and runs through that entire array and logs it to the console. If that makes sense. Sorry, that wasn't a very good explanation. But if we just take a look here now, I'm going to go A, B, C, D, E. Let's look in the console, clear it. And you can see it tells me that I've input the letter at position 0, then position 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. If I had to write, say, Z, 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 tells me that I have written a letter at position 25. And so what I can then do is that I can go to my letters container. Sorry, what I actually want to do is I want to get all of the letter containers. Right. Yeah, so I want to get all of the letters the letter items. So let me go here, const, let's call it letter items equals documents dot query selector. And now it's quite important about when I'm selecting this. So you can see here, if I had to try and, let's do this. So I know that the class is letter. Okay, so if I try and select this, it's going to give an error. Go to my console. It should have given an error. Because these items haven't actually been added to the page yet. It's probably not throwing an error because I'm not doing anything with it. But what I want to do is I only want to select them after they've been added. And so I'm going to say, this isn't too confusing, sorry guys. I want to log letter items and their index. So let's write A, B, C, D, E again, log that. And if we look in our console, hasn't selected there. Why is that? Sorry, let me just double check this. Live debugging. There's quite a lot of moving parts in this thing, so it's a little bit. There we are. So now it's selecting the letters. If I look down here, it selects letter A, and it keeps selecting letter A. What I want is to select letter A. And I just want to double check. You can see here I'm using query selector. I need to be using query selector all. So query selector will only select the first item. So I want to select all of those that match the class.letter. So let me just log into the console again. And if we look in our console, I actually need to deal with the fact that if it's an empty thing, it then needs to be handled. But here you can see now, it's got all of the items in the array in this node list here. So everything that was added to the page, and they're now able to select those. And because I know the index, I can also say letter index. Let's go that. And if we look in the console, you can see the letter A, the letter M, and the letter G. I've managed to select. And those are the only ones that don't match. So the O and the N don't get logged because this else doesn't run. What I can do is I'm just going to set it to have a new background color. So dot background, and I'll set it equal to a gray color. Also just want to handle the fact that if you leave it empty, it says that it exists. So that's obviously not true. So I want to just say here that if put letter equals an empty string, then break. So now if it does that, you use up a life, but importantly, it doesn't tell you that it exists inside of the array, because it obviously doesn't. So now if I had to write hit check, why did it not add? Oh, I need to write style background. And now it's highlighted the fact that A, G, and M weren't in the word, but O and N were. The last thing that we need to do now is we need to run a check to see if the user has actually got the whole word right. So what I'm going to do is I will create, I'm going to create a variable called let correct items, and I'll have it equal 0. And then inside of my for loop, every time it's in the correct space. So this one is for if it's in the right place, I just want correct items to increment by 1. So I write correct items plus plus, so that each time this runs, correct items will get 1 larger. And then finally at the end, I can say if correct items equals of the day dot length plus plus. And then I'll just write a cheeky alert U1. I don't like alerts just for clarity, but I don't think the focus is like showing you how to add a little message to the page. But now if I had to write, oh, there's an error somewhere. Why did I add I++ there? Sorry about that. Doesn't make sense. So now if I write FRONT, tells me I won. But if I wrote FROND, it wouldn't tell me I've won. It would tell me that D isn't in the word. So yeah, that's the basis of the game. One, I guess another addition that I didn't build in, but you could have, and maybe there's questions, so maybe we just move on to any questions that there are. But you could have it that it generates a number of inputs based on the word of the day length. So that way you could have a variable amount of letters inside of the word of the day, and it would just have more inputs or less inputs. But yeah, we have a little bit of time. So if there's a Q&A and anyone has questions, you're welcome to drop it in the chat, or you're welcome to speak out on video, or just unmute yourself. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions. All right, if there's no questions, I'll just quickly show you how I do that. Oh, here we are. How would you generate a random word? So what you could do is you could, I'm sure there's an API to get a random word. That would probably be the way I would do it then, is you make an API call to an API that has a random word. Let's see, random word API. Naturally. I actually just need one. So you could make an API call to go get the item here, and then use that as your word of the day. I can, yeah, maybe we have time to do that. So yeah, I mean, if there's not more questions, then I'll go ahead and do that. Cool, let's see how that works. So let's change the word to scruff. So now if I wrote, say, fluff, what's going to happen? It'll tell me that that's interesting. That's a really good question. I didn't test that. So it tells me that this F is in the wrong place, but that F is in the right place. So the issue here, that's a great spot, is the fact that the so if we try scuff, there now it works. Okay, so maybe it would work, because I guess it's checking against that item. I'm not actually finding. It's actually looking at that exact index. So I guess that should then stay working. It seems to work fine. Yeah, that seems to work. That was a good question though, and I thought that maybe I had not made that correct, but yeah, it seems like I did. Phew. Are there any other questions? cool idea. So let's give that a shot. So if we had to change this to it needs to be 5. So yep, that is 5. And then I had to change these to number. And I had to write 3. The issue. I keep saying there's an error. Okay. I'll just need to comment out this else statement. Because now it's not going to run through that alphabet. Let's try that again. So it tells me that 4 and 5 is in this number. 6 is in the correct position, but 3 and 7 are not. So that is correct. Yeah, so it works with digits as well as letters. The only thing is obviously that the alphabet now, it's not removing those. So I guess what you could do is if you did 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and then you removed all of that. You should be now able to have this else statement. So now if we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it then blocks out the 3 and the 7, which we're not matching. And I think what's useful about this is just as a way of pointing out the reusability of your code. So I often see students have like kind of hard coded a way of doing something into their JavaScript. But this is a good example of what if you wanted to slightly modify the functionality. If I'd hard coded too much of this, like if I'd hard coded word of the day.length or other things like that, I then have to almost like rework a whole lot of my function. But if you can just try and get your function to be as reusable as possible. So the one thing that I mentioned was if here you rather add these, I have to try and think about how I would add them to each row, which I guess is doable. So what I could do, maybe it's not worth me thinking it all live with you now, but just getting it to add these inputs in by hand, by checking on the length of the word of the day. Maybe I can come back to you out of a live session. Are there any more questions there? Well, if there's not questions, we may as well watch me fiddle about with this. So let's say that we do have this word of the day, and we can use word of the day, ConsoleLog a dot length. And that tells me that there is 5 long. Okay. Now what I can do is I'll run a for loop for let I equal 0. I is less than 5. I'll tell you why I'm writing that hard-coded. Is that I wanted this to run to create these rows. So I'm actually going to create that HTML there. And then what I'll do is I'm going to say, I'm going to select the game. I'll call it game dot game query selector, remove that. And let me delete that. I'm trying to move the letters out of here just for ease for now. And we'll have the game. And now let me just quickly grab the HTML that I just deleted. So we want to add these rows. So I'm going to say game.html plus equals okay. So now it's going to go and create all of those there on the page. But I actually don't know how many of these inputs to create. So what I'll do is I'll go and create a variable here. So I'll say inputs HTML. And I'll do this actually inside of a loop. So I'm going to say word of the day dot length. I'll run a for loop. It'll be easiest for let j equals 0. J is less than word of length j plus plus. Let me just create a let here. Let input HTML equal an empty string. And then each time the input HTML runs, I wanted to add one of those. Plus equals that string. And then inside of this, I then go and use a variable. And it's the inputs HTML here. So say input HTML. And now it creates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. If I had to change this to 2, it changes them to only have 2 inputs. The one thing here is that I will need to move this query selector all for my inputs after it's been actually added to the page. So there. Remove that console log. So my word of the day was hello. Let's keep it lowercase. Let's test. I'll make the letters also have a white background. Or this kind of gray background here. Okay, yeah. And I need to also just change this back to not being a alphabet, actually an alphabet. So let me grab that array. And now I can do a test. So oh, it's not working. Something's broken. Is the console going to tell me what's wrong? No, something's just gone wrong there. Obviously, too much fiddling. Is there any other questions? I can try and see if I can figure this out, but might be a little bit laborious watching me go through the code step by step. All right. I think what I'll do is I'll play around a little bit and figure out what I did wrong. And then I'll post a working version to the channel. But hopefully that's been useful. Any last questions? Did everyone get everything of kind of the movements? The kind of the next sibling, next element sibling, previous element sibling, setting something to focus, to lowercase, and then just managing conditional statements to check things, and then using kind of find index as well. So these are kind of some of the methods that we went over there. Cool. Well, if there's no more questions, then you all seem to have got it, which is great. And yeah, awesome. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.